Hi, Brian Benedus coming to you again from my favorite spot, the helm of my cabin of my boat. And this we are moving right along. I'm on chapter 10. We're titled The Business Conference. So I'm getting right into it, and then I'll talk a little bit at the end about a couple of emails I received. There are nights when the wolves are silent and only the moon howls. George Carlin. There are certain words you should never use around someone who has agoraphobia, and they include vacation, trip, journey, and travel. Mere mention of these terms can send them into a fit of terror. Embarking on any kind of trip means abandoning your safe place and leaving behind everything that you know best, and those things that keep your anxiety in check. Even if you do not know what's wrong with you, you find immense comfort knowing there is help just around the corner, if you ever need it. Traveling to an unknown destination throws that security to the wind. And the only other word I can think of that might be worse than trip is conference. I have missed out on countless business trips over the years due to my condition. I always tried to make excuses, create an illness, or flat out lie to avoid every kind of travel. But there were also times when there was nothing I could do. I had to take the trip. I had to do it anyway. In the plastics industry, I made my reputation as a middleman, connecting vendors who manufacture the product with new customers who needed it. It may sound counterintuitive, but in this business, vendors are always more important than customers. I believe with a little hustle, I could always find a new customer. But there really are only a limited number of important vendors. After all, without product, there is no business anyway. Because of this, when I first started my company, the stress that accompanied keeping our vendors happy was extreme. Early on, I was lucky to become friendly with a large bottle cap company in New Jersey. I did everything I could to grow our business relationship, and by all accounts, I was succeeding. In fact, I was so successful, I was personally invited to attend their conference, a ski trip business getaway to beautiful Vermont. The truth was that this was my second invitation. I had successfully excused myself the year before, avoiding the trip. But now this vendor had become even more important to my bottom line and was supplying 11 of my best customers. I was worried about everything. I couldn't do anything that might insult them. I could not risk jeopardizing our relationship. My contact with this vendor was their sales manager. He was a complete jerk and well known to treat people like shit. But I needed him, and I was able to get into his good graces so well that he invited me along on this wonderful trip. Other invitees included over 120 other people who were also their customers. And because I was a bottle distributor, they wanted me there badly. We were in short supply. I knew they needed me there, but I couldn't let on that I needed them more. The resort was only about 5 hours from my office, so like every good agoraphobic, I left 11 o'clock in the morning to ensure I would arrive safely several hours early. Excuse me. I could not deal with the idea of getting lost, and I absolutely couldn't handle driving alone after dark. As you might expect, I was the first to arrive at the facility. It was so early my room wasn't even ready yet. So what do you do when you're in Vermont with nothing else to do? You drive around until you find the nearest hospital, of course, and I found it 8 miles away. Now I had to endure the weekend taming a two-headed monster. In addition to handling the problems associated with my usual anxiety issues, I had a very important vendor I had to impress and keep happy. What made it worse was that I realized that 9 of my regular customers were going to be there too. This conference had rapidly developed into an agoraphobic's worst nightmare. We all stayed in a series of cabins that most people would consider quite charming, but I considered complete hell. There were no televisions, radios, and the only saving grace was an open bar that was available to us every night. I also learned that each of these small cabins would house 12 of us. I found it weird that I'd be sharing a bathroom with a dozen people I didn't even know. And these weren't just any people. The guest list for this conference and trip included several high-profile executives running public companies, CEOs, CFOs. In fact, they could all potentially become new customers of mine someday. And of course, there was little me, the owner of a company called Ocean State Packaging, a guy scared to leave his house, scared to ride ski lifts, and scared of just about everything. I had to not only act like nothing was bothering me, but at the same time, I had to act like I belonged with this crowd and spend my time trolling for new customers. To a salesman, it was a veritable buffet of new business. But the only goal I could focus on was to simply make it through the first night. After we all took our turns bellying up to the open bar, everyone was introduced, and somebody stood up and gave a small speech. I left the room to fake a call so I didn't have to speak. Then the guy said, "Okay, everybody, let's get to bed early. We're meeting for breakfast at 5:45, then taking the buses up to the mountain." Everybody applauded. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was go to bed early. I did not want to be alone in a strange place in the dark with just my thoughts to guide me. Everyone shook hands, exchanged a few friendly hugs, and dispersed. I crawled off to find my numbered room and sit in the dark. I knew I wouldn't sleep. The only good thing about my room was it was full of books. I had never heard of most of the titles, but the selection included a copy of Moby Dick. It didn't take long before I could hear snoring through the thin cabin wall behind me. How dare they sleep? Just like on the gondola on the airplane, I hated them. These guys were pulling in salaries in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, having a good time, and I hated them all. I opened Moby Dick to a random chapter and started to read. I read the same chapter at least a dozen times. To this day, I still have no recollection of what it said. As the night grew later, the fear inside me grew darker right along with it. I felt like a caged animal. I had many hours to reflect, and at some point in the midst of the torture, I rebelled. Fuck this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to go insane here. I'm going to work through this. When you're getting ready to work out or getting ready to fight, there's an adrenaline rush. There's a moment when you realize that the battle is you against you. Some refer to this as the fight in you. I have always had an aggressive side to me, and it's great to draw on it when you're trying to pick a fight in a bar, but it sucks like hell when you're trying to relax and fall asleep at night. It's a night when the fear and anxiety do their best job of seeping in, and every time I tried to fight it, the bad thought process would reboot itself and start all over again. The tentacles of fear and doubt grow, become stronger, and try to drive me insane. The cycle was vicious. And after just 5 more hours of this, I knew I had no choice but to get up and go on a bunch of gondola rides with these guys. I made it through the weekend the same way I made it through most trips in my life, with fake smiles, alcohol, and bits of sleep, only when the sun started to rise. Some nights were better, and some nights were worse, but no nights were free of it all. There were many plastic conventions and conferences that I attended throughout the years. I would not sleep in the days leading up to them, and sometimes not for weeks before. I would be anxious about the plane rides, the tunnels, the accommodations, everything. There was one time I was sitting on a small shuttle plane in Providence, waiting to leave for New York, when I would need to transfer and take another flight to Chicago. I was in the middle of a level 9 panic attack, and I guess I just didn't have the fight in me that day. Just before the door closed, I hopped off and bolted off. This led to another ride in the back of a police car. It was a challenge to try and explain to the police what I was feeling. Without convincing them I was insane. I insisted I was just sick and needed to get off and get some air. No big deal. I'm saddened by all the time I've lost. I'm amazed by how much time I wasted from my late teens into my 20s and into my 30s. It makes me sick to think of what I could have accomplished if I had used all that energy productively. I mentioned early in the book that I never wanted to write about these things. That's true. These chapters are real now as I write them as they were when they happened. And I could feel the anxiety rise in my core as I relived so many of these awful moments. It's incredible how powerful the feelings were, how I could still feel them all these years later. I wrote that this book will open up old wounds that I have scabbed over. That's not a pretty image or easy to do. But I still maintain this story needs to be told, and I will help people. People need to hear this story, laugh, cry, and be embarrassed right along with me, because they need to know that you can not only survive this, you can live, thrive, and prosper. You can be happy. I can say that I've been both cursed and blessed with this thing, and despite the viciousness of it all, it has made me stronger. And it's only now that I can admit and appreciate that. For those afflicted, maybe this book will give you the mental strength to go back and revisit those people who you pretended were not there or lived so far away. If you are in business, maybe it will give you the strength to visit your own vendors and customers you thought were too big or unreachable. It's what I did, and as I look back on it now, I am glad I did it anyway. The fear of death is more dreaded than the death itself. Publicis Zyros. I can't pronounce his first name, but I love that saying. I'm going to say it again, a powerful chapter. I got a question asked of me, which essentially, when I'm reading this, and you might be able to tell it in my voice, I feel the feelings I had years ago. And I feel bad for this guy. And this isn't a woe is me. It's more of, I feel bad because obviously now I know what it is. It's managed, it's fixed, whatever words you want to use. But I get all the time, yeah, I get that. And, oh, I know what you mean. And they go into, I know what it's like to, when you're afraid to ski down with a gondola or a ski lift, or the difference between a situational fear is what I call it. If you're afraid of planes, or if you're afraid of elevators, or if you're afraid, I get more times than none, and it kind of makes me angry, as you could possibly tell. Yeah, I know what that feels like. I'm afraid of bridges. I want to say read the damn book. I'm not afraid of bridges. I'm afraid of the feelings that I had and what could possibly happen while I'm on a bridge. I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of what happens, or I was afraid of what would happen if I was enclosed and had this. We now know it's anxiety and panic, and it comes from adrenaline and so on and so forth. We won't get into that. But I didn't know that years ago. So this book was written, before I get to the healing thought process, with these little tidbits of stories of different parts of my life when I didn't know what it was. If I knew then what I know now, I would have probably gotten help and said, I have anxiety and panic, and maybe I need a pill, or maybe I need to talk to somebody about it. But I didn't know what it was back then. So the problem was, I was afraid of every place an agoraphobic would go. Think about absolutely positively, and Steve Porter just got interviewed the other day. He co-wrote this book with me. And he was interviewed, and he gave a fantastic description, and it's one that I use all the time, and I'm glad he used it. Because the person that was asking him the question, said, what is a panic attack like with Brian? And he said exactly what I always say. It's like running up 20 flights of stairs, and when you get there, your worst thoughts come into your head, and you have to shake somebody's hand or be in a room with 20 other people while they're looking at you and act normal. Act like your heart is going slow, like you have all the confidence in the world, like there's nothing wrong. And the incredible part of this story, I'm not going to say of me, because I always say live vicariously through me. What I'm trying to say is, think about this. The CEOs, the CFOs, they're my friends. I've known them now 3 generations. We deal with some of their kids, not me personally, but my company. And I was able to not only deal with my thoughts, but get their business. So that's my company, my business now called Motivate for Success is business consulting. And nobody, up until I started to write the book, knew that I dealt with this. But the reason I was, and I don't mean to sound this way, but the reason I was so good at what I do is not only did I have to fight this crap, I also got their business. So they entrusted me with their livelihood, their jobs, their families, because if I didn't do what they were supposed to do, why did you go with him? And I get into that more later. So anyway, this is this one I felt I felt as I was reading it. Somebody asked me in the book launch if this is medicinal, and it caught me off guard because I was like, what does that mean, medicinal? Now, obviously, I know what it means. I knew what it meant, but I was so nervous because it was my very first talk that it caught me off guard. It's not medicinal. It's not therapeutic. It's not bad. It's not good. It's a story. And what it is, and I'm always honest. There's no reason to lie. It's inspirational. I wrote this, and it's inspirational to me. I'm saying it, and if somebody out there says, well, look at this guy, he's full of himself. No, I'm not. If you know me, or hopefully you know me by now, if you're listening to my stories, or you're watching me on YouTube, that's not me. What I want you to do is be inspired by my story to go do what you want to do. That's what I'm trying to say. So, we're on chapter 10. We're gaining on it pretty good. And I'm going to do this in less than a minute. Somebody had asked me a couple of questions and so on. So what we've decided to do is we are going to take all the questions, and I'm going to call it Coffee with Brian, or we're going to come up with something. If you want to throw in a title, that'd be great. Just email it to me, and if you want me to say your name, I'll say your name. And I'm going to have, we'll call it Coffee with Brian, and I'm going to take a question and I'm going to go into the answer in depth based on my book and my life. It could be my business portion of my life. It could be my personal portion of my life. Whatever portion it is, I'm going to read it. I'm going to say the name if you want me to. I'm getting emails all the time, and I was doing that in the beginning, Kathy from Pennsylvania or whatever it might be. But the questions are fantastic. And rather than email the answer just to that specific person, I'm going to answer it as I am on YouTube. And my team will put it out there on social media. So I'm at 17 minutes. I'm going to keep this under 18. We are on chapter 11. So we're moving right along, which is great. And thank you again for watching. And please go to my YouTube channel. I'll spell my last name again, Beneduce. Scared to death, do it anyway. Have a great day.